Hello and good morning. My name is Stacie. I'm the student ministry pastor here and one of the teaching pastors at Cassis. I'm excited to join you guys as we keep moving through But I Say to You as a series. But first and foremost, I recognize today is Father's Day. To all the dads, happy Father's Day today, you guys. Absolutely. We love all the dads here. You guys make Cassis a much better place. And I hope that today is a day that you feel really celebrated, that you get to do something fun or eat really good food or just something on this Father's Day. And thank you for joining us on your day. Like I said, we're gonna keep going today in our series of But I Say to You. And something that I've shared in here a couple of times with you guys and my high school students are very familiar with, I am a mom of two and a half year olds. One is adopted and one is still in foster care. So they're crazy close in age. They're really just both about 2.5 years old, a boy and a girl. And I really like being a parent, but one of my favorite things is now that they can talk and they can repeat after me, I love teaching them weird things to say. If you've never had a toddler, y'all, it's so much fun. This is a small thing, but for myself, I really don't like vermin. I don't like mice, I don't like rats, I'm not a rodent person, and if that's offensive, my bad, but it's just not for me. So when we were teaching our kids animal noises, to this day, if you ask either of them what a mouse says, they will tell you it says, gross. And they do it just like that, and they go, gross, because they think that's what mice say, and it makes me so happy. And they'll do it in public, and it thrills me. All kinds of other things. And so recently, my husband Andy and I, we've been on this kick where we've been getting them to repeat back to us some of our favorite movie lines. And so recently, we got our 2.5-year-olds to repeat back to us in the voice. They go, I'm Batman. And it's awesome, you guys. If you haven't seen the movie, you're missing out. But they will say to you, and they're this big, and they have this little voice, and they go, I'm Batman, swear to me. And it's hilarious. It's so good. But the hard thing about funny stuff with toddlers is they rarely leave it at home, because that'd be too easy. Yeah, so neat thing, my kids both go to daycare during the day, and one of the things that they do at this daycare is they line up all the kids one by one in front of a mirror, and they have an affirmation for the day. So you say I am kind, I am loved, I'm smart, something like that. So the other day, my kid's name is Killian. Killian got to start the line, staring in the mirror. Killian, I am smart. And he says, I'm Batman. And I was like, no! Yeah. Imagine staring this teacher in the eyes when she holds you after you pick up your kids and is like, I need you to know about this moment. So she goes, no. Say, I'm smart. And he goes, I'm Batman. So of course, my little girl Lila is in line behind him. So what does she naturally do? She looks at the mirror and says, I'm Batman, which is amazing, except now every 2-year-old in line after them, they do not say I'm smart, they say I'm Batman for the day. So if your kid came home and learned a new word about Batman, it's my fault. But oops, so this teacher has to hold me after school and be like, I need you to know what happened with our affirmations today. And I'm like, oh no, I'm so sorry. We do this, my bad. And so of course, I get home, I've got the kids, and Andy walks in the door, and what is the first thing that I say to my husband, Andy? I say, do you know what your son did today? Yeah, that's exactly what I gotta do. I gotta go, do you know what your kid said to his teacher, and therefore his whole classroom did? And of course, you can imagine Andy's face. Andy's like, oh, this is my son now. Because the other day when we were teaching them this, you were sure standing right next to me laughing just as hard. That's what that is. But right now, he embarrassed me a little bit. He's a little bit of a rascal. I had to deal with the teacher. And so in this moment, he becomes your son. Your son did this thing. And I wonder, have you ever made that joke? At some point, yesterday, your wife and your husband, they had a name. But today, it's, do you know what my husband bought today? It's do you know where my wife went again today? Or it's yesterday, they were your kid, and today they come home and they have a report card or a something, and you go, do you know what that troublemaker did this afternoon? You have that moment, or you're at work, and yesterday you had this coworker named Ryan, and you were cool yesterday, but today, oh, you guys know Ryan? Weird. But today, Ryan did something else, and so today it's not Ryan, it's the boss. It is, do you know what my coworker did in that meeting today? It's no longer this person with a name that I'm very familiar with. It is now this something over there, and it is this title, and it is this label. Because honestly, Andy and I, my kid's name is Killian, and we talk about Killian all the time. I love Killian. He is sensitive, and if you haven't seen his smile, it's so good. And he's funny, and he's all these beautiful things. And then Killian becomes just a little bit of a rascal, and I get embarrassed in front of that teacher, and suddenly he becomes your son over there. And it can start as this funny thing and this natural thing to title and to label and to be this something over there. But the tricky thing about this joke is that sometimes it stops being a joke, or sometimes it just happens so often it really does become the way that we see someone. That when we get uncomfortable around someone, maybe it's because we feel unsure of them, or they make us feel a little uncertain of ourselves. Suddenly, they are labeled and they're pushed a little bit to become a something over there. Maybe there's a situation that's making us angry, or making us feel scared or disappointed, or making us, like I said, embarrassed, feel a little overwhelmed. We're just stressed and life is a lot. And so it just becomes where they become a something, and we need to push them over there, and we need to label, and we need to title, and we need them to be a something and not a someone. Because sometimes, honestly, it's a little easier to deal with a something than it is to deal with a someone. And it can seem so subtle and it can seem so easy, but I wonder if we always catch how destructive it can be when people become a something instead of a someone. And I wonder if that's part of the reason of what we're gonna talk about today, but I say to you, if God knows how easy and tempted we're gonna be to make people a thing instead of a one, and he says, hold on, I need you to know what my heart is about this. Because in this series that we've been talking about, but I say to you, what we are doing is we're exploring a part of the Bible called the Sermon on the Mount, and it comes from a part of the Bible called Matthew chapter 5. And what's happening is Jesus is talking to this large and diverse crowd on a hillside, and he has started by saying, do you ever wonder what God is like? Do you ever wonder what God is like and what it's like to try and follow him and have a relationship? Do you ever sit down and you sit with this scripture or this Bible and you wonder, what is this? What do I do with this? How does this make a difference in my life? And Jesus starts out by saying, I need you to understand that I, Jesus, am the clearest picture and expression of God. You wanna know what God is like? Look at Jesus. And then he says, I am the fulfillment of scripture. You wanna know what it looks like to live with scripture in your life, with the Bible in your life, with faith in your life? Look at Jesus, because he's the clearest fulfillment of that scripture. And so he's talking to people and he's talking to us and he's saying these things. And then he begins this piece in Sermon on the Mount where he goes, you have heard it said. You have heard it said, this is what God is like. You have been taught that this is what God expects from you. You have heard it said that this is what scripture looks like, this is what the law looks like, this is what to do with it in your life. And it seems familiar. And then he follows it up and he says, but I say to you. And what he's been doing is taking seemingly clear moments, like do not murder, do not commit adultery. And he's saying, it seems so clear, but actually I don't want you to miss something important. But even in that clarity, but I say to you, there is a heart of God here and I don't want you to miss what that is. So if you haven't caught parts of this series, I wanna encourage you, go online and watch it, because we're gonna jump into Matthew 5, verse 31. And so already what Jesus has done is he said, you have heard it said, do not commit murder. And to that we're like, Like he says, do not commit murder, but he says, even that is not as straightforward as you think it is. You've heard it said, but I say to you, anger matters. But I say to you, look where contempt might lie. And he goes through the idea of restoring a relationship. And then he says, you have heard it said, do not commit adultery. But I say to you, here's something we can talk about when it comes to our desires or it comes to our satisfaction in different ways. And then we show up in Matthew 5, verse 31. And Jesus says, it has been said, you've heard it said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you, I say to you, that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now, at first glance, much like the other verses, just like the crowd on the hillside, just like for us, this seems like it's super straightforward. Like there is a letter of the law here, we know what to do, we know what the steps are. But what Jesus consistently has been pointing us back to is that when we show up, sometimes when we show up and we read scripture, we want to say, it's in black and white, read it and do it, and that would make it easier. And Jesus says, that's not how to handle this. That's not the posture to take when it comes to the Bible. What Jesus keeps saying is if we start with Jesus and we show up to Scripture, we have an opportunity to see God, to see God's heart. But if we start with the black and white of the text, we can actually miss God and we can actually miss part of God's heart. And even these verses that seem so straightforward and clear is no exception to that. And so for us, I want us to understand when he says, but you've heard it said, the crowd would have been very familiar with this understanding of divorce, but I want us to actually be able to read what their law and their understanding would have been, that we can better understand this culture. So the law that he's referencing is written thousands of years ago to a group, and it's found in Deuteronomy, which is one of the first 5 books of the Bible. And it comes from Deuteronomy chapter 24, starts in verse 1, and it says, if a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, and then he writes her the certificate of divorce, he gives it to her and he sends her from his house. Then if after she leaves the house, she becomes the wife of another man, and then her second husband begins to dislike her and writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her and sends her from his house, or if he dies, the first husband who has divorced her is not allowed to marry her again after she's been defiled. For this would be detestable in the eyes of the Lord. Do not bring sin upon the Lord your God that is giving you as an inheritance. So this is the law that was written to this group thousands of years ago, and this is what they understand to be the place of divorce. But it's important for us to understand a few things that Jesus' crowd already would have been aware of. And one of the first things we need to see is that when it comes to the conversation about divorce, it's really important that we know only a man could ask for a divorce. Only a man can initiate or receive a divorce in a married relationship. A woman is not allowed to. She can't even petition. She cannot even suggest. So anytime that we talk about divorce understandings, it's exclusively for a guy, because only a guy is able to initiate that divorce. And it was commonly understood. When you look at verse 1, it looks like it's giving you some articulation for grounds for a divorce, if she displeases you or if you find her to be indecent. And so there was a lot of conversation within the community and with other rabbis and religious elites of exactly what that meant and how to put it into action. And it was commonly understood in the community that essentially a guy could use any reason to get a divorce. Are there any really bad cooks in here? You're in a safe place, you can admit it. Any bad cooks? Oh, you guys are all really great cooks right now. You're just like, yeah, okay. Well, if you're like me and you just don't want to raise your hand because you're in a room and this is an awkward subject, I'm a terrible cook. I am so bad. I cannot tell you how many times Andy consistently is like, dude, just let me cook the meal tonight. Like, I'm barely allowed to chop vegetables. It's not a skill set that I possess. And it was commonly known back then. Rabbi said, if your wife oversalts your food or burns your food, these are grounds for a divorce. Because suddenly there's some bad cooks in here. Because what that showed in that time is if she's not taking care of your food, it's because she doesn't care about you. And that is indecent. If she is not a good cook, if she's not preparing your food well, then she doesn't care about you. This is indecent. This is grounds for divorce. Or if a man found himself out and about and he found himself more attracted to another woman than he was to his own wife, then clearly he's not pleased with his wife anymore. And so he has found her to be displeasing, and so this could be grounds for a divorce, for a man to ask for a divorce. And so it was commonly known across a spectrum of reasons for divorce. A guy really could use any grounds that he might want, and that's because in this culture at this time, women were really viewed much more, especially in marriage, much more like property than anything else. They were really, even marriage ceremonies could really reflect what it looked like to take ownership of property. They were really very much seen in a marriage situation as more of a something. And think about how we deal with some of our own property. Think about like a tool or your house or like an animal, like your pet or something like that. Think about how we deal with some of those things. Maybe a pet is an exception, but your house or a tool. You are constantly assessing this with, is it doing exactly what I want it to do? Is this tool, is this item, is this something constantly making my life better? Or am I always comparing it to other things I might see around me and thinking if I need to upgrade? Am I constantly wondering if this thing is good enough to be able to upgrade to a different tool, to a different something? And so in a marriage, when it came to divorce, a woman as a something was very, very similar. Men could be bored. Men could be angry, men could be annoyed, men could be tired, whatever it might be for their property, they have a right to find any grounds they might want to discard or to upgrade to a different something in this culture. And in this culture, all he was really required to give her, he didn't need to give her financial restitution. He could if he wanted to. Essentially, the law said if you want to give her financial restitution and help her out in her divorce, you can. But if you don't want to, she can leave empty-handed. And this was really difficult for a woman because for a woman at this time, her livelihood really depended on the men in her life because at this time, women are not educated the same way that men might be. Women cannot own property. Women cannot hold a job. Women really depended on the men in their lives for their livelihood, for their safety, and for their stability. Maybe for the provisions of their husband, and then one day for the care from their kids to take care of her as she has aged. And so when a man gives her a divorce certificate and kicks her out of the house, she's really only left with roughly 3 ways to be able to take care of herself. She can take that divorce certificate and she can try her best to find a man who will marry her. But in this culture at this time, to find a man who will marry you when you were already married is not just difficult, but if you do, it's really a pity marriage. He's really saying, you're lucky I'm taking you in because you're kind of used goods. And he's gonna make sure you always know you're so lucky to have him and you're lucky that you're in the position that you're in. And that's tough. Or you can take your divorce certificate and you can go and try and find a family member who will take pity on you and let you in and will take care of you. But it's always kind of grudgingly, and you end up filling much more of a servant-style role in the home. So it's very reducing, it's very minimizing of you and your personhood. Or most likely, she would have stepped into a career as a prostitute. It was very common. You step in, you take your divorce certificate so you can prove if you're caught with another guy, I am divorced, and you can try to make your livelihood in a career as a prostitute. At that time, those are really your only possibilities. And so for a woman, divorce was like ruination. You do not have a husband, you do not have kids, you do not have a place in the community. You really have lost, or you are a failure at everything that made you a human, that everything that made you part of the community at this time. So you can see that divorce on a woman was very, very difficult. And Jesus' audience on the hillside knew this. They'd seen this. When Jesus says, you've heard it said, they're like, yeah, I have. I've heard it taught, I've seen it lived out. And if they hadn't personally experienced a divorce, they've seen one around them. And part of them are like, that's just what it is. That's just right. That's just what a divorce is going to be in this community is a something, and that's just how it's gonna be. And Jesus says, you've heard it said, all you gotta do is hand her a certificate. But I want you to know, I tell you that God's heart is something different. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife, back in Matthew 5, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality, and what he's really referencing there is saying, except for something that is absolutely irreparable, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery, meaning anyone who takes advantage of her now vulnerable state now commits adultery as well. And this would have been so difficult for Jesus' listeners because they hear it and he's really saying you can follow the letter of the law and still get it wrong. You can follow the exact letter of the law and still miss God's heart. But I tell you, Jesus as the clearest expression of what we can understand God to be, the clearest fulfillment of Scripture, he says, but I want you to see what God's heart is for you and for all people. And so he does 2 things. And the first thing he does is he takes off the table the idea that any grounds are permissible for divorce. What he is saying is this is not a something. People are not property. People are not a something. This is a someone. People are not something, people are a someone, and as a someone, she has great value and worth. Just because you are bored, just because you found something that interests you a little bit more does not mean you get to discard a someone with a value and with worth. And then the second thing that he does, which may have even been a little more radical at that time, is he says that the responsibility for her, even with a divorce certificate, the man still bears responsibility. In this culture, when a man married a woman, he took on responsibility for her. He is gonna provide for her. He's gonna provide safety and a home and food, and he takes on responsibility for her. And what Jesus is saying is, even in a divorce certificate, your hands are not clean and you're not freed of this situation. You still bear a responsibility for what happens to her after she is divorced, what situations she might find herself in what ways she might have to compromise herself. You still bear responsibility for her. The same if you are a man who sees a woman in a vulnerable situation, you still bear responsibility for her okayness, for where she finds herself to be. And we might read this, because for Jesus' audience, this was kind of crazy, and we might read this and be really tempted to be like, you say this is like a thing. I read this and say that Jesus didn't do enough. You might read this and go, they're saying this is kind of a big deal and Jesus' audience is gonna respond to it, but I don't see it as doing enough for women or for people of this time. And I remember being in a class. I was at U of A getting my undergrad, and I was in a class about women in the Bible. And the other people in the class were mostly women, and some of them may have had some Christian background, but many of them did not believe in God at this time. And we were going through moments that Jesus interacts with women. And the girl that I'm sitting next to, I can feel her getting more and more frustrated. And she finally announces essentially to the class, and she just goes, "This is barbaric. This Jesus, this Christian, this Bible, this thing is barbaric." And she was having such a tough time with it. And what I recognize now is that actually there's part that she's kind of right. If we take something here and move it immediately into 2,000 years later, it does look a little barbaric. And honestly, there are some things in the Bible that seem a little barbaric to us at times. There's a lot about sacrifice. There is a lot about mistreatment or placement of women and children or weaker people in different situations, and it can look kind of barbaric to us right now. And I know some of us, or I know some people feel like when I go back and I read the Bible and I read about that God, I wonder, am I called back to that? Do I now need to see people the same way? And I think the beauty of what Jesus is showing us and shows us each and every day is that we follow a God and we are loved by a God who does meet us in the midst of where we are. Jesus was meeting people on that hillside in the midst of where they were with their culture and their understanding. And he meets us today in the midst of our culture, in the midst of our understanding, and even then still says, "But I want you to see my heart." He did it to people on the hillside, and he does it for us right now. I want you to see the heart of God that's happening here. And Jesus is doing that so clearly in Sermon on the Mount. In fact, what I think is kind of funny is that when he repeats this teaching just a few chapters later in Matthew 19, and he does this thing with value and dignity for women, and he talks about marriage and he talks about divorce, the disciples, the closest followers of Jesus, hear him say this and they go, if that's the case about marriage, then it is better to just not get married at all. Like, they hear what he's doing and how radical it is and this heart of God that's in it, and they're like, that looks like it's really, really difficult, and I don't want to have anything to do with that anymore. But what we can know and trust is that Jesus is not in the business of adding rules. He is not walking through this and like upping the ante and being like, you thought that this moment was difficult before, let me make it more difficult for you. What he's trying to do is he's trying to open and reveal what God's heart is. And so the same way that he says God's heart is not to see women as property, as a something, but as a someone with value and with a dignity, Jesus is offering us an opportunity to see that what God's heart most wants us to see is that people are never a something. They are always a someone. That people are never reduced to a label or to a title to be pushed away over there. That he sees people as a someone. And I think what's really important is not just exclusively in a marriage, but Jesus opens it up to be in any real human interaction that we might have. But also, and maybe even a good place to start, is what Jesus is revealing to us, is that's also what God's heart is to each and every one of us. That Jesus makes it clear, we want the clearest expression of who God is. Jesus says, God does not view you and me as some things. That you and I are a someone to God. That the people in our lives are someone to God. We're never a something. And I wonder, think about how we might deal with a something. Put in mind again, maybe it's your house, maybe it's a tool. We're always assessing it. We're always deciding, is it living up to this certain measurement? Is it living up to this certain bar? Is there some type of thing that I could replace or I could do something else with? And some of us wonder, maybe quietly, we wonder if ever God does the same thing with us. And we find ourselves asking questions like, I wonder if God's tired of me. I wonder if God's tired of me, if he's exhausted by me because I've just asked for too much. I just keep messing up. I'm not changing and I'm not doing all the right things. I wonder if God's gonna write me off. I wonder if he's gonna forget about me, like he's gonna put me up on a shelf and he's gonna move on and forget that I was ever there. I wonder if God's gonna realize that I'm actually just broken. I wonder if I'm ever gonna be too broken for God to actually care about, for God to ever actually interact with and step in with. Or we start wondering about comparisons. I wonder if ever God looks at me and then he looks at the person standing next to me and he wonders why I'm not measuring up. I wonder if he's ever comparing me to other people and realizing how much I am falling short of everybody else that might be around me in all the ways that I'm not the thing I was supposed to be. I remember when I was first getting started, like in my 20s in ministry, this was a really, really big care for me because I carried this heavy burden where I was always like, I want to be effective in this life. I thought I want to do something worthwhile for God. This was just a care for me. And I was about 20 when one of the pastors here, Seth, asked me to be his intern. I was a small group leader in middle school at this time, and I was loving it. And so the idea of interning with him and like wrestling through faith questions, it sounded really interesting. It kind of sounded really fun. I like this place. I like this church. I was like, sure, let's go see what that is. But really, what I really thought is I was like, here it is. This is how I finally become worthwhile. This is why God will finally care about me, is going to be this internship, is going to be this ministry thing. And then inevitably down that road, I had moments in my internship and in ministry that just absolutely bombed. I still remember to this day, it still even makes me like cringy inside. I had a sermon that I was doing with both middle school and high school at this time, and it was supposed to be about dating. And for some reason, I mean, talking to teenagers about dating can really be very weird. If you haven't done it yet, try it. But like, it's weird sometimes. And I just got in my head and I felt uncomfortable. And this was supposed to be like this 20-minute sermon. And I'm telling you, I rambled for 10 minutes. I bet I didn't even fully make it to 10 minutes. And I legitimately just quit. I was like partway through this rambling and I was like, this is not going well. I'm just gonna pray. And I just quit. And I remember as I was going to pray, I made eye contact with a student that I knew really well. And he looks back at me and he goes, ooh. Like when a 17-year-old looks at you after your sermon and goes, oh, that did not land how you thought it would. I was like, no, it did not. I felt so awful. And I could have looked at that and been like, that was a bad talk, but I didn't. I made it a mark about me and I was like, that's it, I'm such a failure. I was like, I am not meant to do this. I don't have any worth here. God is looking at this and being like, why can you not figure it out? Why are you so inept at being able to do this thing? And God's seeing that I'm this something and I'm not pulling it together. And then when I was in ministry, or I was in my seminary classes, I started to look around me and I started to recognize every once in a while, I looked just a little bit different than everybody else who was in my classes. Like often in ministry, I found I was the only girl in the room. I was like, well, that makes me different. But also I was comparing myself to others and I kept thinking, I'm like, guys, I'm a loud person. And I mean like my voice is loud, that's cool, but like this face is loud. I am a loud person at any time. If you ever are in a meeting with me, loud, all of the time. I'm not a hyper gentle human. I'm not a very reserved person. And so I started comparing myself and looking around my ministry classes and everything going on. I thought being like, I'm not them, and I'm not as good at them, and I'm not getting this figured out. And I just kept thinking, God's gonna see all the ways I'm falling short. God is going to see all the ways that I am not enough. God is comparing me to all these others in a matter of time until he discards me. It's a matter of time until he realizes that I am broken or I'm not worthwhile. He's gonna put me up on a shelf and he's gonna leave me there. And I wonder if for some of us in here, we've walked with that secretly we worry if God views us more as a something than as a someone. But what I've gotten to realize now, time and time again, I get to realize God does not view me as a something. He views me as a Stacie. There's nothing about Stacie that has ever surprised me. He knew I was a girl. He knew I was loud, and sometimes he knows that it gets me in trouble, but he knows. He knows that gentle is not a quality many people use or reserved, and he still says, and I absolutely call you. And he says, I call you my kid, and I call you by name. So when I show up to places, I get to show up now saying, I show up as Stacie, and I get to trust God in that. And some of us in here, it's not said arrogantly, but it's said because some of us in here need to know that God sees you as a someone, that he sees you as someone that he made with intention and with care, and he calls you by name and says, I know who you are. I know your personality, I know your background, and still I see you, and you have value, and you have dignity, and you are my kid. You are not a something, you are a someone to me. If you find yourself asking, does God get tired of me? God says, how do I get tired of my kid? How do I get tired of you as my someone? I do not write you off, and I do not get bored with you. God is always interested in you. You can never talk to or pray to God too much that he is annoyed because you are his someone. God does not put you up on a shelf and forget about you. God is always extending a hand saying, you always have a place with me because you are a someone, because you are my kid. He is never having us stand in a line next to each other and comparing us one to the other. You are not me, I am not you. And God says, and I made you as who you are, and I know you uniquely as mine. So show up with who I made you to be and trust that I love you. Trust that God gave you value and God gave you dignity as his someone. And I wonder if God, Jesus, when he's talking about this and he's talking to this hillside, it is likely that Jesus has people on that hillside, much like in this room, who have actually been through a divorce. And so they know. Divorce can be really, really tough. Divorce can leave its mark. Divorce can sometimes leave you forever changed. And Jesus knew that. And so maybe what Jesus was also saying is, while the divorce is real and it's meaningful, at never does God look at you and say, that is a divorced person. You are not labeled that way. He does not see you through that lens. Regardless of that situation, God always says, that is my kid. That is someone that I love. That is someone with value that I walk with even through very difficult moments. That is my kid. Because God doesn't see us as a something. He sees us as a someone. But like I said, I think it's important for us before we close out today that we remind ourselves Jesus is not exclusively talking about within marriage. He's talking about every human interaction that we have. Because when we deal with other people, individuals as well as groups, it's very tempting to lump people together or to label someone, to give someone a title so that they remain as something that is over there. It is very tempting for us to do that because, like I said, it's easier to deal with a something. But what it can so often lead to is some form of mistreatment or abuse. It makes it a lot easier. In fact, this is what I've learned from most of my friends who are doing online dating. This is what online dating allows us to do. When you show up on the apps, so often you're not sure if that person is looking for a someone or if they're just looking for a thing. And that's what allows us to be able to swipe in any direction. It's what allows us to be able to ghost. It's what allows us to be able to use or to reject or to say things or to message whatever it is that we might want because we're dealing with a something instead of a someone. Because when we label, when we push away, maybe because it makes us uncomfortable, maybe because we just don't know what to do, it is so much easier to abuse or gossip or mistreat or invalidate or reduce or quiet whatever the thing is that we've pushed over there to allow to become a thing. And Jesus started with marriage. So let's just wonder, what does that look like in marriage? Because marriage is not for the faint of heart. You who are married or in relationships with another person, y'all know that. Like even in really beautiful moments and great moments, you're still like, I'm still married to another human. Like it's just what it is. You are committed to another human. And so often life can just be, it can be a lot and you don't mean to. You just get busy or you get stressed or you get tired or life just becomes tough. And without meaning to, we can start to turn our person into being a something instead of being our someone. For instance, like I said, with say a tool, we're always assessing, is it living up to the thing I want it to be? And you know what? Every time it doesn't, we remember. We keep a mental checklist of every time that tool does not do the thing that I thought it was supposed to do. Every time that it didn't complete the task the way that I thought they needed to. And sometimes in our marriage, we can be so tempted to treat our person like a something, which means we keep this record. We keep this record of all the ways that they've fallen short, and we make sure they know we're keeping score, and we make sure that they know that we're winning. Sometimes we can find ourselves only investing in them when we think that they're gonna give something back to us. We need them right now for whatever reason, so we're gonna pay attention, we're gonna invest in them because life is busy and I got a lot to do and I just need you to do something for me in this moment. Sometimes we can accidentally start to compare our person to other people. If they would just look like such and such. I see what so-and-so is doing in their marriage or over there, and if my person would just do that, and we find ourselves comparing, and oftentimes whoever significant other is finds themselves falling short. Or we can just ask ourselves accidentally, did our marriage or our relationship become more and more about us and less about them? And because that's a tough place to be, and it's not something that we would ever want to do. We married someone or we invested in a relationship with someone that matters to us. But if we're not careful, they can become a something instead of a someone. So ask yourself maybe this week, does my person know they are a someone to me? Do they know I see their uniquenesses and I love that? Do they know that they bring a unique goodness and joy into my life and that I am lucky to have them? Do they know that they are a someone to me? Because that's the truth. We want them to be. And if we catch ourselves daydreaming and living in a sense of dissatisfaction, we have an opportunity to stop that. That is not treating our person like it is a someone. But also beyond marriage, we have so many human interactions and so many opportunities for us to remember it's not a something, it's a someone. I interact with teenagers all of the time, but how often can we do this to different age groups? We like to nickname them. Like, if you've never heard this, our kids will call you boomers all the time. Like, boomer is a label that we can give people who are baby boomers. And what it really lets us do is make them a something so we don't necessarily have to listen that hard. Or we can label them as being entitled. We can label them as naive and young. We can label them as old and out of touch. We can label them as this something because what it lets us do is reduce the impact of their perspective. We don't have to care as much about how they view things or who they are or where they've been or what they've experienced or what they're seeing differently. We can do this with people who just have different opinions than us or a different world view because it's very uncomfortable to interact with someone who's disagreeing with us. It is. We see this happen online all the time when we label groups of people. This is what we do in politics. We label them as being some sort of Democrat or some sort of Republican because when we're able to label something that disagrees with us, it is so much easier to keep them over there and just think about all the ways they're wrong. Sometimes even to just label them as being somehow our enemy, somehow against me. And what Jesus is saying is don't push them over there as a something, draw them close as a someone, even though it's difficult, even though it might ask you to be curious or to be open or to wrestle with the real someone that is standing there in front of you. Because Jesus' heart for us is to not view people as a something, but as a someone in all of our interactions. So this morning, maybe this week, maybe consider asking yourself, maybe you're someone in here and you think, I think I've started to do this. I think accidentally, I have started to view some people in my life, people that matter to me, people that you interact with at work, at school, in your home, your kids, your parents, your spouse. I think I view them a bit more as a something. I treat them as more of a something. Because the very beautiful thing about Jesus standing on that mountainside is he never said, and if you've messed this up, you will always mess this up. He invites us at any moment, choose to treat them as a someone instead. Your next step forward, your next interaction with them, choose to view them as the complicated someone that's standing in front of you again. Give them a name. Take a moment to pause and to listen and to treat them like a someone. But maybe you're in here and you're actually saying, Stace, I think in my relationship, I feel a bit more like a something. I just want you to know, what we said earlier about God remains incredibly true for you. None of us are ever a something to God. You are a someone to God. But also, what I would ask is for you to take the brave step or the kind of the scary step of vulnerability to show up to that relationship and say, hey, I'm starting to feel a bit like a something. I'm starting to feel a bit like I am a paycheck. I'm starting to feel a bit like I'm just a caretaker. I'm starting to feel a bit like I'm just an enforcer, like I'm being used, like I'm not being seen. I'm starting to feel like a something. And I want to be a someone to you. I want to be a someone in this relationship. Take the vulnerable step of letting them know where you might be, that they can take the vulnerable step to maybe shift some of those behaviors with you. But either way, I love being a part of a church that says, I want to show up and I want to love people the way that God does. So what if we showed up and we loved people with God's love, not as a something, but as a someone in that complexity, and get to see what that love does in our homes, in our lives, and in our communities?